Casual Magic has been brought to you by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can get cool stuff. Use the code CASUAL to get 5% off of your sale. And then also by Coalesce Apparel, where you can get really cool t-shirts and stuff, and use the code CASUALMAGIC to get 10% off your sale. And by Archidect, a deck hosting website that doesn't really sell anything, but they like me and I like them, so kindly use them. And now, on to the show. Hello and welcome to Casual Magic, the show where we talk about the fun side of Magic the Gathering. My name is Shivam, Bhatt, and Casual Magic is brought to you by Archidect, Cool Stuff Inc., and Coalesce. Today, I have a very special guest with me. A few weeks ago, I had my CAG co-host, Rachel, on, and we had sat and chatted about her show and about like all the things she does. And I was like, wait, Rachel does a show with somebody else. Oh, I should talk to him too. So today I have Dan Sheehan on. He's the other member of the Lasagna Tier podcast of the Commander Sphere, and a very funny just guy in general. He also wrote the Squee story that came out a few weeks ago. That was incredible and really cool. And does like a Twitter account that I had no idea he ran called Sick of Wolves, which is just hilarious. So thank you so much for joining me today. I'm super excited.
Oh, of course. Thank you for having me. Casual Magic is my favorite thing to play, so I'm super excited to be here.
You know what? It turns out a lot of us like to still just play fun time cards.
Yeah, just jamming.
Yeah. So actually, let's talk about that for a second. How did you find EDH?
It's all Rachel's fault. So any commander take I ever have, I blame on Rachel because she got me back into the game after a long absence. Rachel and I knew each other from doing stand-up. We had met a handful of years ago at a show in Chicago and had been pals since and had run some shows together and stuff over the years. And when Rachel moved to Los Angeles, I was out here and we both were relatively new to the city. And she was even newer than I was. And she was like, I need to make some friends out here. You're going to come with me and we're going to play Commander. And I have she just sort of brought together this group of like comedians and comedy adjacent people who had dabbled in magic in the past. And we all got together at Turn Zero in LA and played I was there every Wednesday for 6 months. It was kind of right when I started, I was addicted, right out of the gate.
Turn Zero is a really cool shop.
Oh, it's a great shop.
Me and Rebel went there when we were down in LA a few weeks ago. And they have a really cool logo. They're shops got this really sweet kind of zero bracket thing. It was neat because we were hanging out with Krim, who's another now Bay Area to LA expat. And it feels like just a lot of my friends have migrated south. Which is good for you and bad for me. But that's cool. Yeah, did you play Magic before?
Yeah, I grew up playing it. I started when I was in 6th grade. My buddy Luke had older brothers who were old enough to actually play the game well and knew what they were doing. And more importantly, just had tons of chaff in long boxes. So we built our first decks out of stuff that probably is worth a lot of money now. I remember that beta forest that everyone loves was just we had a bunch of those that were I never owned them, but at the time they were just dirty cards in a long box. So we all just built our own decks. And I had a mono green deck that was all about just trying to cast Thorn Elemental because I was the damage can't be stopped.
Thorn Elemental's a house though, man.
That's a great
you can
card.
Win games with that card.
Yeah. I didn't, unfortunately, but I had so much fun. I was obsessed with it right away. And it brought me and some lifelong friends together. I still talk to a lot of those guys. I'm one of the only ones left who still plays Magic. But we've all joked.
That's how it goes, man.
Yeah, the brain space though. I feel like anyone can get back into the basic rule set. It's almost like learning a foreign language at a young age, where it's I'm not sure I could understand the stack if someone pitched it to me now, but I'm glad I got it when I was 12.
Right? Sometimes I look at Magic when I'm trying to teach somebody, and I'm like, how did I memorize all of this arcana and timing rules and obscure nonsense, and just why do I remember cards from the dark? Who needs to know? Nobody cares about Goblins of the Flarg. Really, it's fine.
Yeah. I remember a Mons Goblin Raiders made its way into my collection somehow, and I was so tickled by it. I was oh, these guys are so fun.
Oh, you want to know the coolest thing ever? So, one of my pet projects is that I collect soldier tokens. Like my pet deck
Mhm.
is a Tajik soldiers deck, and I have a set of tokens, and each of the tokens has been hand drawn by either a magic artist or by a member of R&D. So like
Oh, nice.
I sent a letter to my friend Yi Chao back when he still worked there and asked him, I'm like, hey, can you ask some of your friends to just draw me some tokens? And he got all these blank cards that have magic backs on them, and then give them to all the people in R&D and have them draw. And one of them was actual Mons who draw an actual Mons' Goblin Soldier token
Oh,
for me.
that's great.
It is the sweetest thing. It's just like, holy crap, this is like 12-year-old me is just sitting there giddy right now. Like, this is so cool.
Those are my favorite types of decks, is the one that just, like, they pick up, like, little mementos over time and just
Oh,
become
yeah.
more and more personal as time goes on.
That is that's, I think, part of the reason we play. Like, one of the things that used to just irk me is people would be like, "Oh, yeah, Commander, man, it's where all the draft chaff that you can't play goes. It's where all the garbage cards that are 12 mana or whatever." And, Commander fans are casuals and not invested. I'm like, have you ever seen a Commander deck? Like,
Yeah.
every basic land in a Commander deck was hand selected. Like,
Mhm.
every card has been either foiled or properly, like, it's got to be the authentic 1992 version, whatever it
Yeah.
is. Like, when you look at somebody's Commander deck, you're not just looking at their deck, you're looking at themselves. You're looking at their
Mhm.
personality in 100 cards. And I don't know. I love seeing people just hand me their deck and say, "Check this thing out. Look at the altar I got of this, random card that nobody cares about, but it was my pet card when I was in 6th grade." And I'm like, "That is what I live for."
Yeah, it's like the little one that just, like, either the art or something about it sticks in
Mm,
your head. It's one of those things that I think just makes it, like, slightly more than a game to people, where
yes.
it's like it has this cultural place in a lot of our minds, where there's just, like, this, like, piece of art sort of etched into your head that you saw at,
Right?
like, the perfect age. I was looking at the card Carapace recently, and, like, when I looked at it, I was just like, "Oh, I think I looked at this 1,000 times when I was a kid," where it's just, like, the old 7th edition art, or it's just a guy, like, ducking behind a tree with this, like, really gnarly looking bone
Like,
armor on his back.
yeah, it's like this whole, like, it's almost like some animal that just grabbed onto the outside of him.
Yeah, it was, and I think some of it was that early art was before there was, like, as much of a conception of, like, house style, so something would just be, like, really far out of left field and would just, like, kind of scare you because if you're a child,
Yeah.
you're just like,
Oh,
"Whoa,"
dude.
like.
It was weird because Carapace had 2 arts from Homeland because that was back when they did weird things like that. One of
Mhm.
them is just a random elf lady with this, like, just, like, exoskeleton, and the other one's this guy who's just been swallowed by a bug, and you're like, uh, what the hell just happened?"
I
But
love it.
I don't know, like, for me, the weird thing is I look at some of these arts, like, back in Fallen Empires when I used to play, there was a dude named Drew Tucker who used to do a lot of artwork, and one of the arts he did was for a thing called night soil. And like what I didn't realize at the time because I was a kid is that night soil is poop, but like the artwork is just this hyper abstract, just smear of browns and greens. And when I was a kid, I was like, this is the dumbest art I've ever seen. And then when I'm like 35 and I'm looking through my old cards and I find it again, and I'm like, this is gorgeous.
I
This
have
is
to look
like a
this up.
use of color and art that I was not here to understand when I was a kid, and it's
Oh,
just like
yeah.
it's like beautiful. It's
That
weird
Fallen
looking.
Empires, yeah.
Yeah, like when you're a kid, you're like, "What the hell am I even looking at?" And when you're an adult, you're like, "That is evocative as anything. That's
Yeah,
amazing."
like,
Also, the card is really good. You should play it.
yeah, I also haven't seen this card, which I consider myself a connoisseur of green, but wow, this is fun.
Oh yeah, dude, I love it. It's like a baby scavenger goose. You
That's
can
very fun.
out of their graveyard and get saplings. I freaking love this card. People always forget it exists until it shows up and starts eating their graveyard, and then they're like,
Yeah,
"But my Elish Norn." I'm like, "No, my
not
mushroom."
today. That's night soil now.
Right? Now it's fertilizer. Oh, that's 10 seconds away from just figuring out what that means. I'm like, "Oh my god, you're turning their creatures into fertilizer." That's horrifying now.
Yeah, just fertilizer tribal, like.
Whoa, like, literally just this very second, I just had that idea, and I'm like, "Oh, that's messed up. That's messed up." Okay, anyways, Night Toil, great card. People, love it. Um, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about specifically is because I think that you and Rachel have a really, really good philosophy, especially with your show and with the kind of like decks that you espouse, which is playing cards like Nightole or Carapace, like going back and reveling in all these cards that are not great, but are
Mhm.
evocative and fun and remind you of a thing, and like
Yeah.
take you to like I Rachel. She plays hella strong decks sometimes. She plays
Oh,
some
yeah.
very very cutthroaty decks, but at the same time, like because I know her because obviously we're CAG mates,
Yeah, yeah.
but at the same time, you guys also sing the praises of decks that I love, which is like, hey, what if you just took a bunch of bulk commons and threw them into a pile and saw what happened?
Yeah, I mean, Rachel has always she has, like, an encyclopedia of cards in her mind. I've always been very jealous because 'cause I'll be like, "What's that?" Like, I'll be talking about my own card, and I'll be like, "What's that one that's 7 green, Howl of the something?" It's like Rachel just, like, always has, like she always knows exactly what cards she's talking about, and so
It's a curse.
she's so good at just, like, assembling these synergies, and so she does have some decks where she will take that draft common and just make it really scary, like, her Octavia deck is so
Oh
fun
my
for that
god, that
reason.
deck is sick.
That thing is a house. I will then be over in the corner being like, "I built wolf tokens." Like, I've been enamored with the card Howl of the Night Pack since I came back to the game because it came out during the breather. I didn't play from, like, late high school until Rachel got me back in, so there's, like,
Mm.
10 solid years where there was just stuff I wasn't aware of, and Howl of the Night Pack was one of those, and I was just like, "A wolf token for every forest I control? Like, this is so busted."
Yeah, it's
Because
like,
like
how could a card ever get better than this?
yeah, like, I was an Azusa player, I was playing mono green
Mm,
Azusa, like, Azusa All Basics was one of my first commander decks, where it was just, like,
I
60
love to hear it.
lands. It's so fun. It's just, like, when you don't really know how the game goes yet, and you just wanna, like, slap down a lot of lands and then finally play a Crows and Cloud Scraper that your friends never let you actually get on the battlefield when you were a kid. Like, that's the deck I was there for.
I mean, one of my pet decks is Titania, which is
Mm,
basically like, hey, what if we just took all of these lands and then just killed them all and made a bunch of elementals and smashed and
that
'cause, like,
rules.
like, basic lands are my favorite card in Magic, plus Crucible of Worlds is my favorite card, Azusa is one of my favorite cards. I'm like,
Yeah.
"Look, here's a deck that uses all of these things and is disgusting at the same time."
I've had an Azusa deck kinda since I started, because then I rebuilt her as an animate lands deck in each of the
Mm.
forests. It's the only deck where each of my basic forests is from a different set, and I have,
Oh,
like,
yeah, it has to
40 of
be, it
them.
has to be.
And so it was just, like, all about animating my lands, and I just changed it over to a Tatiova deck, and it, like, kind of broke my heart a little bit 'cause well, the new Tatiova, not the
Oh,
old
the new one
Tatiova.
that turned things into 3/3s.
Yeah, well, because I like that you can have the animate lands effect in the zone, like, it feels like the
Mm,
deck doesn't dirtle as much, whereas
that's fair.
the Azusa deck would go fishing for, like, a living plane or living lands or something, and,
Or the Gerard or whatever.
yeah, and so it was
Yeah.
just tough to not, like sometimes you would just end up with, like, 12 lands and nowhere to go, whereas Tatiova, like, lets you it's an uncommon commander, so you still feel like it's not too crazy, but you cast, like, a Boundless Realms or something with that, and you have suddenly, like, 7 3/3 flyers, and I've just been trying to find a deck for Earth Surge since Ravnica came out, like
Earth Surge?
Earth Surge
What
is one of the it's one of those cards that, like, just found its way into my head where it's just land
each land
creatures
gets
get plus
+2
2.
plus
Yeah.
each land gets +2/+2 as long as it's a creature. What the hell is this card?
I have no
Wow,
idea
okay.
what it was doing in Ravnica because there was not a lot of
The
land animation.
There was, like yeah, original Ravnica, there was, like, none. There was maybe, like, 1 or 2 oh, no, you know what? There were the no. No, there were no manla
Because it
what the hell is that working with? There
was it
must have been something.
maybe they knew, like, Dryad Arbor was coming or something?
That's so weird. What a weird card to just randomly put into okay, well, anyways, now I'm gonna need to know, but, that being said, though, like, the new Tatiova, that's a fair upgrade if you're gonna be doing actual walking lands. Have you
Yeah.
ever thought about putting in, like, an Urborg and then Korma spell?
Oh, I've thought yeah, that one's crazy. That's such a crazy combo.
I love that. Turn all their
It's
I mean, I accidentally turned it into a mass land destruction once because I was like, I put out Urborg, everybody's got a swamp. I put out Corner Spell, they're all 1/1s. Oops, there's a card that gives everything -1, -1. Oh, whoops.
I've
Whoosh.
I had a Eudora deck briefly. That was my first attempt at doing the animate lands thing. Was because Eudora lets you whenever a creature dies, it comes back in as a forest.
Oh yeah,
And
that
with
card is
Ambush
cool.
Commander, it goes like my friend AD would joke, it goes infinite with a ham sandwich, um,
It
where
sure does.
it's just way too easy to establish an infinite loop. And I remember being in a game where I was just like, "Oh man, I have like an infinite like mana loop on the table." And I wasn't like, "Cool, I win." I was like, this deck's not working. I need it to be more like goofy and fun. Like I don't want what's this infinite mana doing here?
Dude, the first build of Titania I did, I was like, okay, well, what does this deck want? This deck wants to throw all its lands away. Okay, what's the best way to do that? I don't know, Strip Mine, Wasteland, Dust Bowl. These are all cool, repeatable ways to get my land to the graveyard. And then I was like, oh, I accidentally built a turbo land destruction deck that
Mhm.
just completely obliterates your base. Oh, this is not at all what I wanted.
Yeah.
And I was like, what if I just put Zern Orb instead? That's just, eat my
Yeah.
lands, get some guys. I had a lot of lessons to learn about about being friendly to people. It was funny though, because like the first time I played it against Josh Lee Quiet to test it out, and I go and I pitch all my lands into the graveyard. I get a bunch of like 5/3s. I have no lands, and he's like Wrath of God, and I'm like, oh, that didn't work.
Yeah. I have a few decks like that where a board wipe just leaves me real sad.
hmm Until they put out all these recent cards, which are like, your whole team gets indestructible until end of turn. I'm like, oh, where were you 10 years ago, buddy?
Yeah, like Cosmic Intervention and stuff like that too, where it
Yeah.
like blinks it out. That's been a savior in I have an Atagatog deck that
Wow, we're going deep.
it's of all my dumb decks, it's probably the dumbest. Rachel helped me make it like actually playable. Um The joke of the deck is it's very good at taking out one person. And so you're basically just standing there like holding the table not hostage because people can still do stuff, but everyone just knows like if you come at me like one whoever comes at me first, I might have the cards in my hand to like end this or like to kill you in response or whatever because you can just at instant speed sack a bunch of stuff to a Togatog, pump it up really big, and then like gravitic punch somebody. It's basically just like a fling deck. Um, and so it's very good at doing that once, but the problem is once you use everything it takes to do that, the deck is like sort of out of tricks. And so it's like setting back up after you fling your commander is hard. So ever
I
a
have
work in
made a lot of
progress.
decks. Like a lot of my original decks were definitely along that line of like, I've got one gimmick, and once that gun is fired, it is not firing again. So you
Hmm.
better make it work.
It's so
Uh,
fun though.
so what kind of decks do you gravitate towards? Like, what do you like to play?
I definitely gravitate towards like combat-y stuff. I like a weird token. I've gravitated a little further away from token decks recently because it feels like recent tech has made it so that you can kind of end up with like a board state that's huge but not complex. And so it's like it just can kind of overtake the board state a little bit.
Oh, I
Um,
love me a token.
I mean I love a good token, but like I think I went down like an aristocrat's path with it that made it was like that was less of my play style. I'm kind of a Timmy at heart. I like to cast my big creatures. I like to
Yes.
I like to get nostalgic. I like to build around a character that I really like, even if the deck is not
You're
super
speaking my
optimal.
language.
Yeah, it's that's what it's all about is for me is just like oh I've had this card since I was a kid. Like I built a Hirobi Death's Whale deck.
Oh,
um, it was a reanimator deck that unfortunately it was very early on in my commander career before I like knew like I thought I could build it in a way that was like, oh, I only drop him down when I'm looking to like remove the board and then I reanimate cool targets. Again, it was not very good. It lasted like 2 or 3 games, but I had just loved that card so much. I wanted to do something because I think the art is so spooky.
it
Um,
is.
but yeah, he that one got taken apart because I had like a weird. There was endless whispers and something ranks in it's mono black. I forget what the name of it is. But anyway, it created a loop where every time a creature died, it came back, but then immediately had to change possession to somebody else. It was like one of those early deck building mistakes where I was just like, "Oh God, what have I
I just
done?"
gave them all my creatures.
Yeah, it was endless whispers. That's the one. Um,
Man, you're making me dig right now. Endless Whispers has each it's an enchantment for 2 and 2 black. Each creature has when this creature dies to choose target opponent, that player puts this card from its owner's graveyard onto the battlefield under their control at the beginning of the next end step.
And so
So
Hirobi would be, like, wiping the board and just, like, moving everything around to other people.
and Harobia is whenever a creature becomes a target of a spell or ability, destroy that creature. So you can just like ping something and it dies.
Yeah.
Um, that seems that seems really miserable to play against.
I I like when I first came back, I was having a hard time like pinning down what my playstyle was, so I like went online looking for resources and like found like old forum posts and stuff. So I
Oh
when I was a
no.
kid, I bought me and my friends heard some guy at our comic shop told us that if you buy up 1% of a card in circulation, the price will change. And so we all picked dumb cheap cards and we were just going to try to buy them whenever we saw them to see if we could get the price to change. This was like kind of pre like obviously the internet was there, but like it was harder to track this stuff. And we were like 16 or something. So we were like, that sounds true. And so I was buying up every Norn the Wary I could find. And so I've always had a real soft spot for Norn the Wary as a character. But he's also the centerpiece of like one of the most miserable chaos decks I've ever seen in my life. And so
That sounds awful.
I built it right when I came back and I was just like, "Oh no, I like my friends hate this and I hate this." It's like it's so funny that when you're not as like mechanically clued into the game, you can accidentally open up Pandora's box so
Oh,
much
yeah,
easier, I
dude.
think, like
It is so easy to make because the our player tendency is, "Oh, hey, let's grab this cool card. Let's grab this cool card. Let's
mhm,
put all these cards into this deck. Oh, that must be fun. It'll be fine." And then you end up with a deck that is just, like, turbo miserable or just so oppressive that nobody wants to play against it. And you're like, "What's wrong? I just picked my favorite cards." I'm like, "Yeah, you got Mana Drain in there and Winter Orb and Stasis. No wonder why
mhm.
nobody wants to play against it." Like, I
Yeah,
mean, there was a time when I was playing against somebody who was like, "Yeah, I just grabbed a bunch of cards and put them into the deck. They were cool. It's like, blue and white. It'll be fine." I'm like, "Cool. Who's your commander?" It's like, "A Grand Arbiter." And I was like,
oh no.
"Okay." And then so I'm like, "What does your deck do?" He's like, "Well, I don't know. We'll figure it out." And so we play against it. And his whole shtick was, "I'm going to get Elspeth up to Ultimate." And Elspeth's Ultimate at the time, that one was all of your artifacts, creatures, and lands become indestructible or something like that.
Oh,
And then Armageddon. And I was like,
no.
okay, we need to go back to the drawing board because what you've built is like a deathlock that nobody's
Yeah.
ever going to want to play against.
That was some of my early LGS experiences. It's so funny to think of like my thoughts on like casual play and deck building when we started the podcast versus now, because I had like really just come back and to the game itself and just started playing Commander. And so, like, one of our earliest episodes, we joke about hating stacks, realizing that we had just played against a lot of stacks decks in our LGS that didn't have
Mhm.
win cons or whatever, where it was
Oh,
just
that's
like
the
the
worst.
point was the stacks because it was like there are some people who I think when they come back, they're just like, "Oh, I found this like really crazy interaction and it just doesn't let anyone play lands." It's like that doesn't mean play it. Like that's
No, every time periodically people will be like, "You need to, take cards off the ban list." And I'm like, "Okay, which ones?" They're like, "What about limited resources?" I'm like, "Have you read limited resources?" That says the entire game gets to have 5 lands in play, and then nobody else can ever play a land again.
oof,
In a multiplayer game, that seems bad.
real rough.
Like, that doesn't seem good for a one mana card.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, like, that is one of the problems with UC is that people like, Paradox Engine was a big, driver for this as well, where people would just be like, "Oh, I got Paradox Engine in the deck. It's colorless, it goes in any deck. It can do something." I'm like, "Great, do you have a win with it?" "No, I'm just gonna sit here and play a thing, untap all my stuff, play a thing, untap all my stuff." So, like, 45 minutes later, you haven't done anything, we've just watched the merry-go-round,
That was a
and
really big lesson for me in deck building was like no matter how much I love a card or the art or the character, the deck still has to like the narrative of the deck is the most important narrative at the table. And like so these early decks I built were like, just like, oh, Norin's cool. So I found a list online and I built that. And like I feel like it's evolved so much since then where I'm like, trying to tell a story with all these basics in my animate lands deck or whatever. It's been very fun to kind of work my way through that over the last handful of years.
yeah. I don't know, it's just it's such a challenge because, like, people like, I don't wanna tell people not to play things. I don't want to tell
Mhm.
people not to play their favorite cards or do but sometimes pros will come to me and be like, you know, especially now the pro Magic is kind of dead, and they're like, "Okay, well, I wanna play Magic still. Let me find look, people are playing Commander, so let me go play Commander." And they'll come to me as like, "I wanna build a creatureless blue control deck, and nobody seems to wanna play with me." And I'm like, "Okay, well, in one-on-one, where we have an agreement that we're gonna try to kill each other and then go to the next round, that's fine. That's a totally fair and reasonable play style.
Yeah.
You wanna control the game, and I want to stop you from doing that, we understand where we're coming from.
Mhm.
When we're playing a multiplayer game and there's 4 of us who've decided to spend 2 hours doing this, and you're going to spend the 2 hours saying, 'No, you can't,' there's a reason why people might be less interested in that because,
Yeah.
like, you're not doing anything, but you're not letting anybody else do anything, so the game's not progressing, so everybody's just having a crappy time,
I feel like
and
it's Commander's like a yes game. Like Commander's a game where people want to hear yes more than they hear no, which doesn't
yeah.
mean, obviously you shouldn't like remove things and
Sure. I
stuff
mean,
like
I'm
that,
not saying
but
don't play removal, but at the same time, like, understand that this is the social dynamic of a multiplayer game means that we're here to play.
yeah,
Like, this is
exactly.
the thing we've chosen to spend time doing together. It's like
Yeah.
board game night or watching the game with your buddies, and like, there was someone who was like, Commander players would be probably happier if they just instead of playing cards, just went and like put on the football game, cracked some brews, and just hung out and chatted. I'm like, or we could sit and like build our Rube Goldberg machines and then throw
Yeah.
them at each other.
That's the thing for me is, yeah, that's basically what we're doing. It's like, I don't really have that level of interest in sports, but it's functionally the same when I get together with my friends. It's like, yeah, we are all just like sitting in a circle and like talking, and
Exactly that.
like there's not really a major difference there. But I think some people just have a hard time imagining gameplay not being like the number one thing that's
Yeah,
being
like,
focused on.
I mean, my entire modus operandi as Mr. Casual Magic Guy is basically like, look, I can play cutthroat magic too. I'm
Hmm.
not here to do that. What I'm here to do is make sure that everybody leaves the table feeling like the last 2 hours they spent were a good time and that they wanna do it again, right? Like, my goal is, "Hey, we all got to have fun. We all got to do the thing. Somebody won the game because the game has to end," but that's not necessarily material to how cool the game was. Like, my
Yeah.
deck popped off and did a cool thing. Your deck popped off and did a cool thing. Everybody feels good about it, and we leave.
Yeah.
Like, some people get very angry when I say that because 'cause they're like, but the purity of the game is a competition and we're here to win. I'm like, then sit down at a table where people want to win.
Yeah. It feels to me like there is a subset of folks who just cannot imagine playing the game with more of a focus on like narrative or the social experience, and that is certainly like a
Like, that's
preference.
fair. I get it.
Yeah, like it's fine. I just like don't understand it at all. It like it makes me glad that it exists because like I'm also somebody who like I have played like a lot of 1v1 Magic. I mess around on Arena whenever I'm bored, but like it's not something where I'm like looking to make that the primary way that I engage with the game. And so Commander's existence gives me a way to keep playing this game that otherwise like the reason I got out when I was younger was cuz my friends who kept playing started playing tournaments and stuff, and I was just like frankly never like good enough to do that. Like I was just like very medium good at the game.
Yeah,
Like I could
exactly.
win games against my friends and maybe at a pre-release, but very rarely in a competitive setting.
Like, the way I look at it is like, I like to play Street Fighter as well. And when I play Street Fighter, I like to just sit down with my friends and throw fireballs at each other. I'm medium good at the game. I've been playing for like 30 years, but I'm okay. But I'm not going to go to an arcade and try to play in a tournament because I'll get my butt whipped, right?
Yeah.
Like, but at home, we could just sit and just chill and do fun times. Like, I'm a good Magic player. I mean, you can't play for as long as I have and not be at least some level of good.
Mhm.
But that's not what I care about. Like, what
Yeah.
I care about is we could be playing board games or we could be hanging out doing anything, but I like Magic and I like hanging out with my friends, and this is a good way to do both of those things. And I think that for me, like, I wouldn't be playing Magic. I mean, I came back to Magic in 2011 with Innistrad because I was into Duels of the Planeswalkers on the Xbox, and I was into playing like dual decks and all these like casual ways to build 60 card constructed type decks. And then somebody was like, "Hey, you've got like," I was like, "Man, I wish I could still play like Soul Ring or like my favorite card from my kid, Keldoran Outpost or whatever." And they're like, "Have you heard of Commander?" I'm like, "What the hell's Commander?" Or like. Elder Dragon Highlander at the time, right? And I'm like, I love Elder Dragons. I want to play that. And discovering that, oh, there's a 100 card casual way to play, which has just multiplayer and lets you play your favorite card from when you were a kid and nobody
Yeah.
cares. I'm sold.
It's
And
so funny because Rachel had to like the first when she was explaining it to me, I like first saw the size of the decks and was like, "That's nuts." Like, like the first time you see 100 card commander deck in person, you're just like, "What is
how
that?"
do I shuffle these with my
Yeah,
baby hands?
it's so big. And then then from there she was like, "Yeah, and you like put a legend at the helm." And I realized me and my friends had played a weird variant on the game that my friend called Pit Fighter.
Hmm.
Because Onslaught came out and it was like it must have just been something that it worked its way through his older brother's friend group and like word of mouthed its way to us, where we would all have one of the Pit Fighter legends from Onslaught as like basically our commander, but they started on the battlefield.
Oh, that
And
sounds
so
rad.
yeah, you'd play like a 5-player game and it was everyone just had one of these pit fighters in play, but it was always like the Rorik's Bladewing player had a lot like
Whoa.
massive advantage being in the air with 6 haste, like,
Yeah.
it
I mean,
was
that's a good card, man.
yeah.
But yeah, like the idea of just like every deck I build is I'm a slave to theme. I'm the type of guy who
Mhm.
I will not put a card in my deck unless I can justify it narratively, flavorfully in a fourth ocean. Like my Tajik deck is called the Son of Keldor because it's Keldoran outpost. I built a whole narrative story around why these people are traveling the plains, why they're all soldiers. But every card in that deck has to either be soldier or like a general. Like so, it's got the angels who lead the army, one medic because every army needs to have a medic, and
Mhm.
every time Watsi puts out a card that's like, here for your white tokens deck, it's a thing that'll make them all have like plus 12 and indestructible. I'm like, yeah, but it's not a soldier. It's not good on my soldiers deck.
Yeah.
And like all of my decks are like absolute like my Titania deck is all about throwing the lands away. So the lands in there, the basic lands are either full art, like full art unglued lands or whatever that have like full trees, or this misprinted German Wald, which is basically they took a plains from third edition and accidentally put the forest text on it. So when you play it, it's
Oh.
illegally a forest in some mono green deck, so it's a forest, but it looks like a plains. And I'm like, because the tree's been clear cut. And now Titania's
Huh.
pissed, and the elementals are going to wake
That's
up and
awesome.
come and thrash you because I am that idiot who needs to make sure every card in my deck has a meaning.
Yeah.
And then you sit there and you play against somebody who's got like a 4 color value pile and is like, yeah, dockside into ad nauseum. And I'm like, I
Yeah, it's like,
guess.
I don't wanna take away anyone's enjoyment of that, but it's just, to me, fundamentally different.
Yeah, it's like, come
It's
on, we're not approaching the same game.
exactly. It's like I really do think like something I've always talked about when power level comes up is the idea that there are like stake players and sizzle players where there are people
Yes.
who
I
they
love this
want
theory of yours, by the way.
thank you. It's like of all the things we've talked about on the podcast, I think it's the thing I'm like personally proudest of because it was just like I was noodling around trying to think of like
Mhm.
the best way to describe the way that I play, and it's like stake players are like docksiding into ad nos where it's just like I want the meat and potatoes, like I want the function, and the sizzle is like I want it to like look and feel fun, and I want it to smell nice. It's like it's all the showmanship surrounding it. And I
Mhm.
think that's like just a really nice distinction of like what people tend to be looking for because I think it can feel really hard to reconcile in the moment, but I think once people have that shared language for finding what they want, it gets easier to like find the right pod. Like the rise of CEDH, I think has definitely lowered the amount of pub stomping because people just know where to go now.
I 100% agree. I think like early on, I had a very bad opinion of CDH because I felt that it was just the wrong way to do things, and I was very imperious and a total jerk about it. But over the past years and stuff, as I've met them, as I've talked to them, as I've played the format, I'm like, you know what this is doing by giving this a label and a name and a direction, and giving it like a strict defined meta. We're taking all these people who used to just come to a store and like thrash you and bring like these turbo messed up decks that would just like ruin everybody's night. We've given them a place to go
Yeah.
where they can get their enjoyment against other people who want to do the same thing.
That was when it clicked for me. I was like, because I was realizing that I was at turn 0, and I was, like, asking somebody what decks they had with them because I was like, "I don't really have anything, like, too spicy with me." And he was like, "Oh, well, I have like a Turgid, which is just below CEDH, and then I have some CEDH decks." And I was just like, "Oh, those sound miserable." But also, it's so nice that we have the language to have easily figured that out rather than me
Right?
being knee deep in a game with this person before figuring out what game they were playing. Like, it made it
Right?
so much easier for both of us. Like, because he doesn't want to deal with somebody who's salty about his Turgid deck. Like, he wants to play people who are excited by that.
One of the defining experiences of Commander for me is back at PAX 2016 or whatever. I sat down at I was at PAX, so there was like a party at Card Kingdom or whatever Mox Cafe Mox at the time. And I went there and I pulled out my like soldiers deck, which is just complete. At the time, it was like maybe a 2 out of 10, right? Like it was just super thematic, super trash, a bunch of like cards from Onslaught and Odyssey block and random soldiers from here and there,
Hmm.
whatever. It was crap, right? Like it was thematic and crap. And I sit down and I'm playing against a guy who's playing Leovold, and he's playing like Leovold with Teferi's puzzle box and wheels. The other person was playing another like CDH take all the turns deck, and like a third person was playing some other kind of like stacks lock deck. And I'm just like, you guys are playing the worst Magic I've ever played. You suck. This is evil, and this is miserable. Why would you ever do this? And it took me like a decade to realize, no, I was the problem. I
Hmm.
was the one guy who came and sat down with my like gummy bear deck and ruined their night because they were prepared to kill each other and have a
Yeah.
good time, and they were just like pitying me because I wasn't doing anything and I was playing totally out of my league. And it's like, now we have a language where they would have just said, "Yo, we're playing CDH," and I'd be like, "Great, have a good night."
Yeah. I was definitely I did that same thing a couple of times. I mean, one that always sticks out to me, I'm like so embarrassed by this story. The guy this guy at turn 0, we were waiting for a pod to finish because then we were going to shuffle up with a few different groups and there were going to be even fours for multiple people.
Sure.
So in the meantime, he was like it was just the two of us waiting, and he was like, do you have like a deck for 1v1 commander?" And what I heard was, "Do you have a like a deck that would function if we tried to play like a 1v1 commander game?" But he
Oh,
had
no.
like actual like I think it's called like French EDH or
Yeah, French
something.
dual commander, yeah.
Yeah, and he had one of those decks, and so we shuffle up, and I'm playing my literally that Azusa deck, that one of the very first ones that I ever built, and I'm like, "Yeah, I think Azusa can hang because she, like, ramps really quickly in my head," so I'm thinking, like, "That'll give me an edge in a 1v1 game," and he has a Kalia deck and just
Oh,
destroys
no.
me, and I was so pissed. I was like, "Dude, that's not like, I do not wanna play against that again, like, that was awful," and he was just, like, clearly so confused because, like, in the like 5 turns, like that, because
Mhm.
like I didn't want to play artifacts in my Azusa deck, so it didn't run a Soul Ring or whatever. It's because it's like it's mono green. She's of the woods, and so this guy's like, "Yeah, well, I don't know what to tell you. Like, this is the format."
It's like, "Hey,
Ugh.
I invited you to, an F1 race, and you brought a tricycle. I'm not sure what to tell you, bro."
And I was like, I was like, "No, well, you should have a tricycle too." Like,
It's like, "No, you're the wrong no, it's the kids who are wrong, right?" Like,
yeah, exactly. It's so
and
funny.
it's perspective, man.
Hmm.
Learning that, hey, sometimes no, we're actually the party that was not prepared to to come to this battle, and that's not fair. Like, I think having a language for this, having an ability to sit there and say like, "Yo, you know what? This is my casual deck. It's a Voltron deck, or this is my like battle cruiser deck, or this is my like this is my CD. Like, this is my end of the night. We're going to kill somebody deck."
Yeah,
It's
like,
just it's
last call in
important.
20 minutes. Like, we got to get out of here, Dick.
Like, we're just here to thrash each other, so let's go. That's a good time as long as we all know,
Yeah.
and as long as we're all speaking the same language.
I think it's as simple as like, I think the language is getting there, and I think frankly now it's like casual has more of like, I think we need to typify a little bit more on
Yes.
our end of things, but I do
Mhm.
feel like it's as simple as, they'll sometimes put those little inserts in with pre-release packs that are like, by the way, here are like some fun little sub games you can play with boosters.
Yes.
Like with commander decks, I think it would be as simple as just being like, so there's CEDH, there's this, there's that. Just in case you wanted to like talk about this or something like that. Like, I feel like we're this close to having like a real functional language that even really new players can understand. But
The problem is figuring out, like, and I've thrown myself at this problem for like 3
yeah.
years now, and, like, it's easy to sit there and say, like, "This is the high end because we know where the top is. It's hard to say, "This is the nebulous middle,"
Hmm.
right? Like, because there's definitely a range of, I mean, there have been a lot of attempts to try to figure out how to classify people, and I don't think we're there yet, and that's why like I've shifted my uh, focus into, hey man, talk, like communicate and
Mhm.
tell people what you're like. And people are like, oh, I don't want to tell them all my things about my deck. I'm like, nobody's asking for an essay. Nobody wants to read a primer on your deck.
Yeah.
What they want is just sit there and say like, yo, are we playing fast or slow? Are we
Mhm.
like building up, or are we just going to crash into each other? It's like there's easy ways in generalist language that we can sit and talk about. And I think like the fact that you gave like lasagna tier just it makes me so happy that like that definition exists, because everybody understands that we're just here for BS, man. Like,
Yeah, like, it's so funny how it evolved because, like, when we, first started that, it was we were recording just in my apartment, and I was like, "Wouldn't it be really funny if one of these tiers was just the recipe for a lasagna verbatim?" And it became this, like and Rachel was like, "Oh my god, yes, we have to do that, and then we have to follow it with this," and, like, that's how that whole list came around, was just, like, the 2 of us riffing on this thing, and then it became this bigger thing that kind of described the whole style of what we played, and just such a, like, a handy little shorthand for us to be like, "Okay, yeah, so, like, this is the type of Magic we play, like, where there's gonna be, like, suboptimal choices, and I if I have a board wipe in my hand, but you're doing something obscenely cool, I'm probably not gonna wipe the board," like
oh god, that is one of my that is the thing that gets me the most trouble online, is that I am 100% the guy who, if you are going off and about to win and I have the counter or the removal or the wrath or whatever, I will just say, "Gosh, I wish I had a removal or a wrath because
Mhm.
you went off and that was amazing, and I'm not going to take that moment away, and the
Yeah.
game has to end one way or the other, and I would rather it go out like this than with me." And people are like, "How dare you sandbag a wrath?" And like, you're insulting me by like, cheapening my win, or like by, you're being condescending or patron. I'm like, how will you know? Are
Yeah.
you cheating and looking at my hand? Because then we have a different discussion.
Yeah, it's
But
private
otherwise, it's like,
information.
I'm never gonna tell you, and I'm just gonna immediately shuffle my hand into my deck. You will never know, and we'll both feel like it was rad.
The way I always think of it too is I think some of it is because of having done a lot of comedy stuff in my life is like there is always one more joke, be it in an improv scene or a stand-up set or whatever you're doing. It like if you're working with people and trying to make something funny, there's always going to be one more joke you can make. Like no one person necessarily has dibs on the last word, but if somebody is like, especially in improv, like if you are on stage together and somebody's just nailing it and they say something and the whole audience is on board, you don't keep going after that to try and get
Yeah,
your moment. You just say like, "That ruled, man. That was great." Like
let him
that
have
was
it, man. Like,
exactly, yeah. And they
I
still won. Like they won the war of spectacle. Like
exactly. I mean, I think there's actually, it's interesting because some of my favorite Commander content creators have all been improv actors, like you guys, for instance, or the Commanders Brew podcast up in Toronto, or like LRR or whatever. Like,
yeah.
because they understand that the multiplayer dynamic is the same as if you're an improv troupe just having fun. It's like,
Mhm.
what is the goal here? The goal is entertainment, not necessarily to win or to like, have a rap battle where somebody comes out on top. It's to make sure that we all leave feeling like that was rad,
Yeah.
like that should be hella funny and awesome.
Yeah, it's like,
And
are you watching a gladiator battle or a circus? Like, that's kind of the difference
yes,
between the 2.
yes.
It's like, are you looking to see one person, like, triumph against all odds, or are you looking to see, like, an elephant balancing on a really big ball?
And I don't
Um,
wanna undercut, like, the CDH, because I think CDH is fine and
yeah,
fun, and it's super cool. It's just not all of Commander has to be CDH. Not all of Commander
yeah,
has to be, like, dead serious. Like, it's funny sometimes, like, I hate to keep picking on pros, but it's so easy to do. But sometimes, though, like, I'll see these pros come over, and, like, that story I started to tell, and, I met one. Me and Gavin Verhey were in, Vegas in October or whatever it was, and a famous pro had come, and they were like transferring over from playing like, vintage or modern whatever to playing EDH. And they're like, yeah, I brought a bunch of my favorite cards. I built this deck. Can you take a look? And it's just blue black, like all of their favorite thought seizes, and like, mill cards and land destruction, hand destruction. Like, and I'm like, your win con is like a 2/2. There's like
yeah,
120 life worth on the table. And what you're doing is basically like rifling through everybody's hand, destroying it, sucking out the deck, and then like l- slowly leaving them to dry. And I'm like, you're gonna play one game with this ever, and then nobody
Mhm.
will ever play with you again. It's like I don't understand. I'm like, the goal here is different. We
Yeah.
like like the goal is different. If you
Yeah.
want to play Canadian Highlander is an amazing format that I love, but the goal there is to kick the crap out of each other. It makes
Mhm.
sense. Commander is a multiplayer game. We're here to spend a few hours.
Yeah. That's how I mean, that's definitely how I've felt about it, and I feel like now, luckily, there's enough people interested in both that it's making it easier for people to find their
Yes.
spot. Um, but
And I
yeah.
like that people carry decks for both. Like almost every CDH player I know will also just have a casual deck, which is
Mhm.
great. Because then they're like, okay, yeah, I'll just pull out, my Civilian Merfolk or whatever. I'm like, right, let's go. Um, so I don't want to leave without talking a little bit about your writing because you got to do something super cool,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
not a lot of it get to do, which is you got to write a magic story.
I
So
did, yeah.
can you talk a little bit about that? How did you get the chance to write a story?
Sure. So I have been talking to them about this for a while. The first contact I had made was actually pre-pandemic. It was
Wow, that
when
was a while.
not about this specific story, but I had more generally I'd been doing some previews through Sick of Wolves. And I had like a few contacts at Wizards, and I was just like, hey, if this is something you all be interested in, I have a book coming out with a publisher. So I have like published writing that is, available to read. And I have loved this game since I was a kid and would very much like to contribute to the story in whatever capacity. And this was during a time when I think it was like right in the wake of the War of the Spark novels. So I think things were changing a lot over there. Like, because I like web fiction wasn't as, I feel like there's more consistent web fiction now than there was at this time. Um, and so I basically reached out and just put it out there. I was like, here's some samples I have. Here's, my whole deal. And this was in probably like November or December of 2019. And then things got a little crazy after that.
Huh, you don't
I
say.
forget why, but I was
Hmm.
inside for a year. And so
Boy,
it was basically obviously like that thread kind of got dropped along with a lot of other threads while we were all just sort of getting by.
like, sort of
Um,
trying not to die.
yeah, exactly. I, like, didn't even think about it. And then they got back to me, like, years later, and this was after the book had come out, and I was, like, lucky enough to have it included on a couple of, like, lists and stuff, and it had a nice run. And they had basically asked if I was interested in, like, in still doing some sort of writing like this, and I was like, "Absolutely, 1000%." And then when I found out that the story was about Squee, I, like, lost it because I was like it was all the original Dominaria stuff. That was my bread and butter when I was a kid. So to
Awesome.
get to, like, dive into that world as somebody who started as a fan, was just, I was excited when the book came out, but honestly, if there are things I could like transmissions I could send back to my 12-year-old self, I think he'd be
Right?
more excited about writing a magic story than his own book, probably.
Yeah, but, I mean, that's so sick, and
It's
s it was
awesome.
such a good story. It was such a
Thank you.
weird like, when I was like, "Oh, there's a Squee story. What's going on?" First off, it was hilarious. It was
Thank you.
absolutely hilarious. Also, like, I was already not a fan of all the Phyrexian body horror and everything, so I was like, "Oh god, they're getting complete Squee. It's gonna just be the worst thing in the world." But the way you gave, like, a weird theological, like, drama to this story of Squee, I'm like, I never thought about that, but the fact that he's immortal and just dies and comes back over and over and over again, amen, that that'll do a number to a guy. Like,
Yeah.
that'll mess with you.
It was once I
And
realized it had been 300 years in canon of this, I was just like, that has an effect on it. Like, this is not going to be the same Squee that we saw in the first Weatherlight books because he'd spent 300 years with this immortality. Like, that's a lot to go through, a lot to process. And like, especially too, like when I was rereading some of the old lore and I just couldn't help but think of like how, like, uh, a lot of the characters like were kind of rude to Squee, and so to be sort of the last person standing after 300 years of that, I just think is really interesting. Like, it's just a really interesting place to put a character and a really interesting place to start a story with someone who's been immortal and didn't always used to have that to deal with.
It's it was such a cool, like, in my other life, I'm a priest, and I'm a Hindu priest, so that means dealing with things like reincarnation and death and rebirth and stuff is bread and butter in my world. So I was just thinking, like, what is this? Like, this goblin who sits there, and in magic, goblins are basically like suicidal little bombs that run around and die, and, like, magic has not treated goblins very well. Like,
Yeah.
and, um the idea of having Squee who's basically just there to die and come back and is treated like crap by everybody. You did a fantastic job. That was
Thank you so
absolute,
much.
like, capturing eh, you gave depth to a character that I didn't think had any depth, and that's the sort of thing that's hard to do, right? Like, it's like when Allison made Jace into a character everybody cared about instead of just that asshole. Um, yeah, man, that's sweet, and I'm really glad you got to do it, and
Thank you.
congratulations.
I
It
really
turned out really
appreciate it.
that
I'm
story was
glad.
very popular.
Hey, yeah, I was like, I was when it was coming out, I was just like, this character has like real fans who are like very excited about everything that happens to Squee, and so I was like, I will know right away whether I succeeded or failed them, based off of like the reaction, and so it was so nice to see that people enjoyed it.
And to be fair, all the other stories of the Dominaria United were very miserable and really just, like, sad and depressing. So having a story that wasn't was a nice, change of pace.
Comedy gives you a lot of room to play around with like tension in a way that's not quite like, I think there's a reason a lot of comedy people end up in the horror genre is like because it lets you mess around with tension in a way that's not quite as terrifying. But I think they are sort of similar. Like comedy and horror are this natural fit for each other. And so like I think getting to add a little comic relief to an otherwise like very spooky, ominous set
Yeah.
was very
You need
fun.
to have that because you need to have that tension break, otherwise it's just
Hmm.
like it's people don't understand pacing anymore or the idea of, like, give people a breather so that you can throw them back into the pit and make it worse for them again.
Yeah.
Like, if you just keep drowning them, they will die before they get to the point that you're trying to make.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
I think we just had, like, 2 decades of grimdark where people
Hmm.
forgot that it's okay to breathe once in a while. And,
Yeah.
like, I think, like, your story was an absolute breath, and it was lovely.
Thank you.
Also, you are really hella funny. You and Rachel are hella funny.
Oh, thank you
So
so
it's
much.
super fun. Um,
It's been so fun to get to like because I did, stand up and stuff for years and getting to interact with a community where I get to like do comedy stuff but so specifically tuned to this thing that I love has just been such a blast to get to be a part of.
do you still do stand-up?
Not since the pandemic. I was kind
Sit
of
down?
yeah, exactly. I got really attached to just writing like longer form stuff. I think part of it was when I wrote the book I was more satisfied with getting to like stretch out and like really tell a story from start to finish. I think I like narrative work more than I like
Mm.
stand up. And I also just think there's something about like I'm a very anxious person. I'm a very neurotic person, and
What, an anxious, neurotic stand-up? Oh my god.
yeah, I'm the first
Truly.
of my kind. Something about having a little more control over a final product felt really nice about writing. Whereas on stage, I would always get off stage and immediately start just like a rock tumbler rolling through the one line that I flubbed.
Oh, yeah.
And I still do that with typos, but it's I guess less. It stings less when it's something that I
Well,
can
it's not
edit
like
and
dropping a
read.
tag, though, where you're sitting there like, "Oh, no, I missed the laugh. What
Yeah,
happened?"
like that the one thing I came here to try and I forgot to try it. Like it's nice to have
I
that.
love stand-up, so I'm a big fan of, like, listening to people tell me long rambling stories that end up being funny somewhere in there. Sometimes. Patton Oswalt has his new special where it's, like, got a 15-minute long bit that goes nowhere, and I'm like, "Bro, this
That's
is
a
not
long.
this is not funny. Like, this stopped being funny 30 minutes ago." But,
Stories are risky that way. It's
yeah,
storytell I used to run a storytelling show for a really long time, and, they can if you don't land the plane perfectly, like, it can be such a letdown for the audience. It's a really risky type of comedy, but I love it.
yeah, I mean, like, look, we can't all be Mark Maron or something like
Yeah.
that, who's just, like, not effortlessly funny, but his stories are really, really good.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, anyways, I could riff about freaking stand up all day long. Like, my guy is definitely Robin Williams, not gonna lie, I miss Robin Williams every day, his
Oh, he
stand
was
up
so
was
funny.
hilarious. Um, but wow, man, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been lovely to talk
Oh,
to
of
you finally.
course. Thank you so much for having me. This is a blast. I really enjoy the show, and I appreciate, like, putting good casual vibes out into the world. So I've always really loved what you do.
I appreciate that. I mean, look, man, we're all just here to have fun. We're all here to
Yeah.
just chill, play cards, and just come back the next time and do it again. Like, I don't like hostility in Magic. I think it's more fun when we're just enjoying playing the game.
Yeah.
But if folks wanted to find you, if folks wanted to find your stuff or your book or anything like that, where could they go?
Yeah. If you want to find the podcast, Commander Sphere comes out on Mondays. It comes out the previous Thursday if you're a patron, which is cool. If you want to find my book, it's called I Am Not a Wolf. You can find it on any online bookstore. It's still out there, I believe, in most places. Amazon if you don't have a fun local, IndieBound if you've got a local shop you want to support. And then as for me personally, you can find Sick of Wolves is the handle for Not a Wolf. And then my handle is It's Dan Sheehan.
Yeah. And you should definitely follow him. He's great. And as always, you can find me at Gearpuri Gears. You can find this podcast anywhere podcasts are sold, or at Cool Stuff Inc. every Tuesday, or at YouTube every Thursday. Thank you, EK. Once again, the show is brought to you by Cool Stuff, Architect, and Coalesce. And remember, my friends, it is not magic without the gathering, and we will see you next time.